My name is Therese
Bernstein.
Goodrich, and I'm president of the Park Forest Historical Society. I want to welcome you all here this afternoon to a very special program. And before we get on with the program, I have an announcement to make about our big event. Every year we have the Hall of Fame event where several of Park Forest's finest are inducted into the Hall of Fame. The program is going to be on Sunday, April the 18th. It will be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at Freedom Hall. And we hope that you all will come, and because we have refreshments, we want you all to RSVP to Jerry and Penny Schnee. If you did not receive a flyer about the event, please let me know, and we will make sure that Jerry and Penny, or you can get their phone number off of the flyer that I have today. And so without further ado, I'd like you to introduce our archivist and program manager, Jane Nichol.
All right, thank you, Therese. Just a couple of brief announcements from me. Since we are honoring pioneers today, we want to let you know that Manuel Cantor, who was one of Leona DeLue's fellow first residents, who also moved in on August 30th, 1948, passed away last month. He was given a very nice recognition in the Tribune for the work he did with argon. And I do have a copy of the obituary at the back if you wanted to read more about Manuel. He did come down at the beginning of the 50th anniversary before we opened the museum. So we were sorry to hear that he had passed. And also we received word and were asked to announce to you that Susan Lynch, who was the wife of Frank Lynch, passed away in Florida in the past couple of weeks. They were among the first families to sign leases here. And people just wanted to be sure that we were hearing that since it happened out of state. Although she did still live in Chicago. In October 1988, we held a panel of 1948 residents. The library has a videotape of that panel, which can check out. The sound's not great, but the panelists were, and I had a lot of fun watching that last night. The panelists on that panel were the Deaches, the Dinnersteins, Edith Warnes, Terry Ruehl, and the Scarianos. And we announced the DeLues as being there, but you weren't able to come, I think, at the last minute. So I was expecting to see Leona, and there she wasn't. So now she's here.
Thank you.
So I'm very glad we included you this time. Okay. Let's see, and I also wanted to make just a brief announcement about we're planning our next meeting for May 23rd at the library. And we hope it'll be more of a social event, like our previous Are You Still Here party, where people who've lived here for a long time come and they tell us where they moved into and where they live now, and they get to visit with each other. And I'm thinking that maybe a good short program for that would be for possibly Jerry Schnee and I to talk about the Smithsonian exhibit and show some of the pictures, because we haven't yet done that for the group formally. The plans aren't firm yet, but watch for an announcement of a May meeting. Okay, I want to introduce our panelists now. We have Leona DeLue to my left, Terry Ruehl, Jean Bernstein, and Wilma Brenne. Jean Dinnocenzo is here with us in the audience, but she has had some family social events come up in the meantime, and she has to leave, so she would rather just be part of our audience, and I invited her to make her 2 cents worth known from her chair. But if I don't think you'll get a chance after today's meeting, but if you want to hear about the homeowner side for people who came directly to houses instead of to rental units, seek Jean out, because I know she's got good stories. I've heard some of them. And please get to know her. She's now docenting for us at the museum, and has a unique perspective, different from our ladies who moved into rentals. These ladies are joining us during National Women's Month, so we want them to concentrate on the pioneer experience from the woman's angle. We want to know how they came what it was like to come here while the village was still under construction, what was it like to deal with children in the new development, what social networks helped them survive the isolation from more settled towns activities, and isolation from their own extended families. So we will begin at the very beginning with Leona DeLue, who moved into Court B1 on August 30th, was it, 1948?
I don't remember the date.
Okay,
End
if
of
it,
August,
okay, if it was Monday, it was the 30th. If they moved in on the weekend, as I usually say, then it was August 28th. But she moved in with her husband Ross and her 5-year-old daughter Mary. They were one of the first 3 families to move into the village. They moved into Court B1, which was the Klutznick family's court. So Leona had sidewalks, didn't you?
Only in the front.
Only in front, okay. And Ross and Leona remained in the village the longest of any of the 3 families and are regarded as our first family. So Leona now lives in the retirement community, the park, in Olympia Fields.
Thank you.
You're on.
Thank you. As Jane has said, my name is Leona DeLue, and on a hot day in August 1948, the first 3 families moved into Court B1 on 26th Street and Western Avenue. Bill and Jane Heckman and their little boy, Madeline and Manny Cantor, who had just been married, and my husband Ross and our little girl and me. Actually, the Klutznick family was supposed to be the first to move in, but Ethel Klutznick gave birth to their 5th and last child, so their move was delayed, and we 3 families preceded them. We actually moved into a construction camp. Our court was still being built. The building facing Western Avenue was finished. There's a plaque on the building commemorating that. Our building and the 2-unit Klutznick house were finished, but the other units were being constructed. Western Avenue was a 2-lane road with deep ditches on either side, and on the corner of Western Avenue and 26th Street, there was a pile of clay-like dirt that was at least 4 stories high, which I must say became the favorite place for the kids in the neighborhood to play. As apartments were finished at each court, families moved in. The post-war housing shortage was particularly bad in the Chicago area, and veterans and their families were living in all sorts of conditions. My daughter and I had lived for 5 months with my parents in New York, while my husband looked for a place for us to live. If he found something, he was told to buy a few pieces of broken-down furniture for a large sum of money. Then we lived in a hotel in the Loop for 5 months, so I thought my apartment was just the most beautiful place. Park Forest grew very quickly, and we were given the opportunity of forming our own government, and we became a hotbed of civic activity. The favorite game at Mrs. Waldman's nursery school was going to a meeting. The little girls would pretend to put a handbag on their arms and say, "Good night, I'm going to a meeting." Parents were always going to meetings. For many women, it was an unforgettable experience. Husbands were gone all day, and it gave Park Forest women an initial opportunity for leadership. The first women's organization in Park Forest was the Park Forest section of the National Council of Jewish Women. And Jane has asked me particularly to mention this. Its basic principle was to find the needs of the community and meet those needs, and when the needs were met and could stand on their own 2 feet, they were turned over to the community. The National Council of Jewish Women started the Well Baby Clinic, the Youth Employment Service, Newcomer Service, which welcomed new residents, and Handy Camp, among many other innovative services. Over the years, I had a chance to meet many women who would tell me how they had looked at Park Forest but would never live there in all that mud. And I always wanted to tell them that they missed the best time and the most fun. The word feminism hadn't been widely used so many years ago, and women in those days were at home. But we were involved in everything that was needed, from civic needs to religious needs. A woman, Adele Sachs, founded our first newspaper, the Park Forest Reporter, which grew and flourished for many years. I could tell so many stories about life in those early days, but I can't close without saying that the friendships we made have lasted a lifetime. We lived in Park Forest. I lived in Park Forest for 52 years, and it will always be my home.
Well, thank you, Leona.
Very nice.
I think I'm going to make you tell a little bit more about children. Can you say a little bit?
I?
Can you say a little bit more
Well, yes,
about
I can. I
having
didn't want
Mary
to
in
go
the
over my
mud?
time.
Okay.
Well, the children could not go to school. Those of school age. My daughter was 5. She was ready for kindergarten. And Mr. Kletznick had made arrangements with the Chicago Heights School District to educate our children. And he would pay, of course, for them. Well, they never thought this place would take off, so they made absolutely no preparation for our children at all. Finally, after 6 weeks, they arranged to bus our children into a variety of schools. The kindergartners, and there were many of them, went to Grant School, which at that time was on the corner of 26th Street and Western Avenue. And they got a very good education there, I must say. My daughter went there through 4th grade. She went to a variety of schools, including one on the hill, on Hunger Hill, which was just great. So that it was a wonderful experience for them. It was a diversified community, and they had many wonderful experiences that they would not have had otherwise. Then, of course, District 163 was developed, and that made an entirely different story for the children here. One of the things I should tell you is that when we moved in, there were no screens on our windows, and it was hot August, and if we opened the windows, the bugs would eat us up. If we closed the windows, we would die of the heat. So finally, I got the bright idea in the middle of one night that we could get mosquito netting. So my husband went into Chicago Heights to this little tiny Sears Roebuck store that was there at the time, and they sent him to Klein's, where he found mosquito netting. But Phil Kletznick saw my little girl bitten up to pieces, and he was so upset about that he sent a truck over Labor Day to go to some Ohio town to find screens for all of us. And we were eternally grateful for them. He didn't realize that we did not have screens on those windows, and it was quite a hardship for us. I think the children had a wonderful time in Park Forest, growing up in Park Forest. It was a wonderful community for them. When the 50th anniversary of Rich East High School was, I think it was just last fall, the 2 daughters of one of my very close Park Forest friends who has lived in Arizona for many years came for the reunion, one from San Diego and one from Iowa. And they both called me up, and one of them said to me, "I had the most wonderful childhood that anyone in the world could have." I thought that was the greatest testimonial to Park Forest that anyone could possibly want to hear, and I was delighted to hear it.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yes, that's better. I love the screen story, so. Okay. Our next panelist, Terry Ruehl, came to court E8, and it was October because it was Halloween.
I know.
Yes, we had a discussion on the phone. So Halloween, 1948, and on, was it November 5th?
Yeah.
You had Roger. Okay. Her son, not your first, though.
No, second.
Second son, okay. And Terry's court was one studied by William H. White while he was writing the Fortune magazine series, which ran May, June, July, August 1956. And she and her family and friends appeared in photos published for the articles. The photographs have a new life as note cards, which are sold all over the country. So if you have friends sending you these cards they're finding in gift shops in California, they're probably Terry exercising with her friends. And I did run over to the House Museum and bring the notebook where I have some copies of the cards that we've received from around the country. And Leona and Terry both appeared in the documentary Chronicle of an American Suburb, which was shown on WTTW last October. And Terry was just shown in a film clip on South of Chicago on WTTW, so she's quite the cover girl for Park Forest.
That's an honor. I haven't broken the camera yet. My husband read about, in Collier's magazine, about Park Forest when we lived in our 2.5-room apartment at 3446 West Fulton Boulevard in Chicago, which I'm afraid to go back there now. When we went up to see the exhibit, the Chihuly exhibit. I wanted to walk down the street and see the house, but I didn't. We were supposed to move in June, and we moved in, as you said, Halloween Eve. And we brought our pumpkin with us. Naturally, we were in less than a week, and Roger was born. While I was in the hospital, my mother came out from the east to help me before and after. And I think what she did was scream at the people, the workers, chewing up our basement and bringing it up the stairs. We had one of the first new basements in Park Forest because the water had come in, and for some reason or other, they replaced the basement. When I came home, it was very cold, and with a new house, and we had lots of mice in the basement. Thanksgiving, we had a dining room set delivered, and I was so proud to use my crystal that I had not used for all the years with the Air Force and in Chicago in our huge apartment with a drop leaf table. I used the crystal, had it all set up, and the leaf fell down. So we swept up the glass and continued on. We did have a turkey, and as I said afterwards, we probably should have, we had so many mice traps going out in the basement that we had the wrong meat for dinner. It was very cold the whole winter, and with a new baby in those days, you didn't go up and down stairs. So it wasn't much fun for me or my mother. And in February, my husband went to a dental convention in Chicago, and through my neighbors and Judy Ferguson, I came down with chicken pox. And I really had it. Everyone in the court seemed to have that problem, and my mother was back east by that time, and I called, she says, oh yes, you had chicken pox, you have a couple of marks on your nose. But one of our neighbors wound up in the hospital with it, George Spiro. In the summertime, as Leona said, my son said last summer when he came up to visit me, he said there was no place like Park Forest. Our kitchen door faced the tot yard, as we call it. People have called it, spelled it differently in other days, but anyhow, we did not have a key club, which I think we had no key club, and I think that was more or less.
Came later, I think.
I don't know.
Who knows if it ever
On the
came?
other side of the street. But we did have a lot of parties, and the kids out in front, they played all day, and we watched them, especially my unit, 2868 Western Avenue, could keep an eye on them during the daytime. And I had a neighbor who had a business in Chicago Heights and happened to be home that day. It was a birthday party. And one of the mothers handed all the kiddos these metal toys. So you know how little 4- and 5-year-old kiddos are. My son wound up, he still has the scar, and that my neighbor took him to the doctors and they patched him up. He still has the scar. Where was I? Oh, yes. My husband traveled Monday to Friday, and I didn't drive in those years. So at Christmas, Fields brought out a little red wagon, and about a year and a half after that, I'd take the two of them to the new store. What was it, Pick and Save? Was that the first grocery store?
First grocery store, yes.
And we had a very, very fine time shopping with the two kiddos and made it home all right. Gary Warnes, about 2 years later, and E.G., now a 5-year-old, they went off one day, and all of a sudden they're gone. Naturally, our mothers were all upset. We called the police. I know that Wally Green was one of the first police officers, and I can't remember the other, and I was even going to call
Jack, his first name.
Who?
Jack, his first name was. I don't remember what his last name was.
Wally Green was our,
That was another one.
yeah, I can't remember the first one's name. Anyhow, we finally found them, and when Edith did, she took Gary and his tricycle, and she says, "Now you tell me where you were." I just chastised E.G. and put him in his room, but I think she was gone for an hour and a half while Gary was trying to find out where they had gone on their walk. They had loads of fun with the salamanders. The liquor store was the first store in operation in Park Forest, which I understand that they have the board meetings, trustee meetings down in the basement, right there. And then the drugstore came up, and American Community Builders took over the Holiday Inn for a while. And, excuse me, Ed and Rose Waterman, Ed was affiliated with American Community Builders, and he asked me if I'd work there in the evenings, which I did as cashier. And Father Coogan would come over every Sunday night for his popcorn, which he was a very, very nice man, and lived on Western Avenue in one of the apartments that I went down to go to confession to him on the stairs, going upstairs. A memory that you don't forget. And when I cashiered at the Holiday Inn on the weekends, we didn't have very much money. I still don't, but we'd spend our money and go over to Sheldon's Delicatessen and enjoy on Sunday night what I had earned on Friday and Saturday night. We had a babysitting club, and as Leona said, I went down, helped out the National Council of Jewish Women. They went down to Mantino.
The Pink Ladies.
Yeah, the Pink Ladies. And we had a real good, interesting, educational, because they sent me to the ward where I got along with the recovering alcoholics. But I didn't enjoy it too much. We had neighbors on both sides of us, which I'm sure they still do. We were in an inner building. And I wore sneakers for 7 years. Let's see, I had some more notes, what I forgot. Anyway, when we moved to the house, I didn't want to move until we found a house with a dining room, with memories of our first dining room, I guess. And we moved to the house in '55. And I've had a wonderful time since then. With one of the problems, received this copy one time from the Star, which I'll read. To the editor, just another big plus for living in Park Forest. Since 1948, when my husband and I moved into Court E8, we have had assistance from the police departments, paramedics, fire department, but recently the Department of Public Works went far beyond the call of duty. I found out from the Department of Public Works that I could go up on North Street and get wood chips for my garden. I put the wash tub for summer parties in the trunk of our car, drove to a pile of chips, and right into a huge mud hole. I exited the car and saw a Public Works truck coming down from North Street. I don't know, it was only God's will that they came by me. I got out, asked for their assistance, turned around, and I locked the car inadvertently, and the car was locked. They went down to my house, Eddie was home, and got a set of car keys, came back, got in the car, got the door open, I got in the car, they pushed me out. They adamantly refused a bottle of liquid refreshment I had just purchased, refused money, and went on their merry way. Again, I repeat, as I have for many years, it is great to live in Park Forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Thanks. All right. And Jean Bernstein came in May 1949 to 118 Birch Street. She taught in several schools, eventually becoming the superintendent of District 163. And unfortunately, I don't know Jean as well as the others, so I can't tell tales on her before she talks. So
Good.
she'll have to tell her own.
I will do that. George and I were married in the spring of 1947 when I was still in college. And then when I graduated in June, I came to Chicago and we lived in a subleased apartment for the summer and began the task of trying to find someplace else to live. We finally did find a small back of the building apartment at 71st and University. And yes, we did pay $800 for furniture money, which was just a pile of junk that we had to throw out in order to get the apartment. And we lived there in Chicago. I was going to the University of Chicago at that time, working on my master's degree. In November of 1948, some friends of ours, who also worked at Argonne, as did my husband, invited us out to Park Forest for Thanksgiving dinner. They had just moved to Park Forest. And so we got on the train, and we took what seemed like this endless trip from, you know, the Hyde Park area of the city of Chicago out to the suburbs. And Lou Kaplan picked us up and brought us to our house, his house, and we had a very, very nice Thanksgiving dinner. And needless to say, we were quite impressed with the house because we were living in, you know, living room, bedroom, kitchen, bathroom with just tiny windows that looked out, and these houses looked absolutely wonderful to us. At that time, you didn't even have to, if you worked at Argonne, you didn't even have to come to Park Forest to find your house. You went into the housing office at Argonne because Argonne had an arrangement with the builders. Because so many scientists were coming in being newly employed at Argonne at that time, that you could rent your apartment through Argonne. And the advantage was they would give you a 3-year lease. And so we signed the 3-year lease for 118 Birch Street at $85 a month for the 3 years. And on a very, very kind of gloomy May Day in 1949, we moved to Park Forest. George rode out with the moving truck, and I rode with our little boy on the train again out to Park Forest. And so we settled into the house, which we thought was wonderful. We had 2 big bedrooms, we had a living room, we actually had a dining room, we had a decent kitchen, and we had a basement. So the house was absolutely wonderful. Outside the house was not so wonderful because we lived in the midst of the mud with the duck boards, and the kids were, of course, constantly in the mud. We had many, many angry meetings with the builders. I think that, you know, the women gathered together at least once a week or once every 2 weeks to yell at them, when are we going to get sidewalks, when are we going to get grass? The only thing that the mud did for me is that as a result of the mud, I got my first washing machine. We moved in and we didn't have a washing machine and we didn't have a dryer. And I always had, a child with a very sensitive skin, so I always had a pail of diapers boiling on the kitchen stove. So finally we broke down, we bought a washing machine and dryer, and that helped us get through the mud. There were, as a number of people have mentioned, no stores in the village when we moved in. Our lifesaver was the milk truck. It carried the 3 staples of life: milk, bread, and cigarettes. So that we were able to replenish our supplies when the milk truck came by. And I cannot tell you how irate we all were when the first store that opened was a liquor store. We just couldn't imagine why they would open a liquor store when we were so desperate to have a place to shop for groceries. Finally, the Pick and Save opened. George and I did not have a car. This was a deliberate choice on our part for 2 reasons. First of all, there was a bus that ran from Park Forest to Argonne, so George didn't need a car to get to work. And second, we decided that for the amount of money that it would cost to have a car, we could go into the city of Chicago a couple times a month and go to dinner and see a play. And at that time, we preferred to do that than to own a car. So I had 2 little kids, and I would trudge over to the grocery store, one riding his tricycle, the other in a baby buggy. It was back in the days when you had a baby buggy, and do my grocery shopping. And then by the time we started out for home, the tricycle rider was exhausted, and so he would go in the buggy, the groceries would go in the buggy, the tricycle would go on top of the buggy, and I would push the whole mess home again to get home. And as a matter of fact, the fact that we didn't have a car necessitated something else in our lives. When our second child was about to be born, I rode into the hospital. I was going into what was Chicago Lying In at that time. I rode into the hospital with my husband's carpool, so that was how I got to the hospital when our second child was born. We had a lot of social life in the early days. Certainly we had wonderful neighbors and people bonded together to help themselves in every way. But our closest friends did not come out of the court. They came out of other groups in the community. First of all, they came from the very large contingent of Argonne employees. And I don't know how many Argonne employees there were. There were either 2 or 3, including ourselves in our court, but there just were tons and tons of Argonne employees. And so we made many friends, already knew many of them when they moved in. And then second, there was a very active and thriving Jewish community. And many of our friends came out of that Jewish community. In fact, one of the first actions of the Jewish community was to form a Sunday school, because many of the adults were not in themselves terribly religious, but they were very concerned that their children have a religious education. And so they formed the Board of Jewish Education so that our children were able to go to Sunday school on Sunday and also to Hebrew school 2 afternoons a week. And out of that Board of Jewish Education sprang, I don't know how many congregations in the community that eventually formed out of that group. Although the Board of Education, Jewish Education is an independent group, is still in existence. In addition, there was a very active political and social life that women were involved in. There was a small but enthusiastic Democratic contingent. And both George and I were allied at that, and many of my close women friends came out of that group. And as a matter of fact, in the summer and early fall of 1952, I was out campaigning for Adlai Stevenson. And of course, as all of us, because at that time, you didn't get a babysitter to go out campaigning, you dragged your kids along with you. And so I would march up to houses with a 4-year-old, with me and with a 2-year-old in the stroller, and I'd knock on the door and do my campaign spiel. And then just as I would start to leave, the 2-year-old would stand up in his stroller and yell at the top of his lungs, "I like Ike." Now, I spent a long time trying to convince that child. I spent hours, I cannot tell you how many hours, trying to teach that child to say, "I'm madly for Adlai." But he was a 2-year-old, and you know how 2-year-olds are. It's no, 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 no. And every time I would say, "I'm madly for Adlai," he would say, "No, no, I like Ike." Well, at that time, the village was predominantly Republican. Ike carried the village, and I think he had a closer finger on the pulse of the community than I did at that time. I was also personally involved with the NAACP in Chicago Heights at that time, and again, a number of women with whom I knew in the village were also involved with that group. And one of our biggest thrusts was to try to get the telephone company in Chicago Heights to hire African-American young women. The young women who graduated from Bloom could go downtown in the city of Chicago, and the telephone company, which was Illinois Bell, would employ them in Chicago, but would not employ them in Chicago Heights. And so we carried on a very active campaign, picketing the telephone company, doing things like that. And at one point, we had a big meeting, and Thurgood Marshall came to speak at the meeting. And it's interesting, as just a sign of how times have changed, that we tried to organize a dinner for Thurgood Marshall. Now, Thurgood Marshall at that time was a very, very prominent lawyer. He hadn't been appointed to the Supreme Court yet, but very well known nationally. We could not find one restaurant in the whole South suburban area that would make a reservation for us for an integrated group. And so we ended up having, what else, a potluck in a church basement in Chicago Heights. I also was one of the first members of the Human Relations, was then the Human Relations Committee in Park Forest. It was formed right after the Cicero riots, and there was concern about the human relations climate in the village. At that time, Park Forest was an all-white community, and it was not possible for African Americans to move into the community. So one of the first things that we did was to hold several meetings with the builders again to see if they would change their policy, if they would open the doors to people of all backgrounds, because we really wanted a more diverse community. Obviously, what we did stirred up some feelings of anxiety on the part of the village fathers, because after 2 or 3 heated meetings, they decided to abolish the Human Relations Committee. They abolished me and my fellow members, and then they, 2 weeks later, appointed a Human Relations Commission and got some new people on it. And I remember a very heated meeting in 1953 and I can't remember where the village met at that time. I don't remember where the meeting was, but it was a very heated meeting. And when the meeting was over, one of the trustees, who happened to be a personal acquaintance, his wife and I were close friends, came over and said to me, "You know, Jean, what you're asking for is not wrong. It's in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. But you have to remember this, Park Forest isn't ready for those things yet." And I thought that was a kind of telling comment about what the climate of the village was at that time. In that sense, I'm happy to say we've changed for the better. I think I could say a lot about schools. I won't, because I think my time is up, except to say that the children did go to Chicago Heights, as Leona mentioned, but then we disassociated from Chicago Heights, and we had a separate district, District 173, for 2 years before we then joined with 163. And that group, that school board for 173 built Dogwood School. And my oldest child started kindergarten in September of 1953 in Dogwood School. And the one thing I remember vividly from that day is that the principal's name was Harley Lautenschlager. And the reason I remember it so well is my son was trying to learn to write both his first and his last name. He could write his first name, but he was struggling with writing his last name. And we kept saying to him, "Be thankful that your name isn't Harley Lautenschlager. Think how hard it would be to write your name if it was Harley Lautenschlager." Eventually, he did learn to write his name. George and I lived in Park Forest at 118 Birch Street, then at 2448 Western Avenue, and then at 310 Illinois Street in Park Forest from 1949 until 1979. In 1979, we moved to Olympia Fields. And we were in Olympia Fields until 1998. And then when Park Center Town homes across the street from the library were built, we came back. I think we were the first people to move into that area. We came back. We moved in October 1st of 1998. And we've been very happy to be back in Park Forest.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and our next lady, Wilma Brenne, moved into Court C5 in June 1949 with the first 2 of her 6 children. Her husband, Lynn, was involved with the Aqua Center Board and with being a village trustee, and I think he worked for the airline, didn't he, Wilma? Okay. And Wilma came to Park Forest because she got tired of keeping her children's cribs in the closet in their Chicago apartment. And she took the bus to ACB's Monroe Street office downtown to get an application for Park Forest and told her husband they were moving. So she worked for many years at Ludeman Center and at the Trinity Lutheran Nursery School, and I'll let her take over.
We were part of the 49ers that went south to seek our pot of gold, and it was Park Forest. And it was great because I was living in what I call a room and a half. It had an inner door bed and a big closet and a bath, and just a kitchen that had a little dining area adjacent. And so it was like a room and a half. And in that time, I had 2 baby boys that are a year apart. And my husband had come home from World War III, He had been in, it felt like World War III. He had come home after 3 years in the service in the Pacific Theater, and we couldn't find places to rent that would take us with our children. and I had heard of this place called Park Forest. So one day while he was at Midway working, I got on the streetcar with my two little fellers, and I rode down to a bank in Chicago that had leases for Park Forest, and I leased an apartment here. I think it was $89.50 at that time, and it was a two-bedroom inner group of apartments on in C5 on Dogwood Street. And when my husband came home from work that night, I said, "We're moving," and he says, "Where are we going?" And I said, "We're going out to Park Forest." "Well, where's that?" He said, "That must be in the boondocks," when I told him. But fortunately, we did move, and I don't think we even had too long a wait before we could move. And it was just like heaven. We got a place with upstairs and downstairs and a basement, and we just didn't even have furniture to fit all that space, but it was great. Remember going into the Heights to shop for groceries and the laundromat, because I didn't have a washing machine either, and in those days we had cloth diapers, so they had to be done kind of often. And I remember one time I was driving into the Heights, and there was a lady holding up her hand. She wanted a ride, and we gave anybody that needed a ride. We picked them up and took them. And you know who it turned out to be? It was Ethel Klutznick I took into to the Heights. But anyhow, while we were there in C5, another neighbor of mine in C5 came along, and she says, "We need somebody in our unit to fight ACB for our needs." So I said, "Well, put my husband down." I wanted to keep him busy. And so, by golly, he got involved, and he liked it. And he eventually became a trustee, I think, for 16 years in the village government. And in the meantime, his airline, United, had moved way up to O'Hare. And we found that looking for housing up north and west was much more expensive for housing. And they were starting to build housing here in Park Forest. So we bought a two-bedroom house in Park Forest and moved into it. And then after that, we had 6 children. So then we added on an addition and an extra bath. And my husband liked it so well that he wasn't looking anymore for other housing. But the carpool saved him by giving him he only had to drive once a week to O'Hare area to work. And then eventually he ran on the Republican Party as a state representative, and went down to Springfield for a couple of years too. So we have had a very interesting life in Park Forest, and I recommended it highly for anybody that came here. Unfortunately, I only have one child and her husband that stayed in Park Forest. The rest all sought their fortunes elsewhere. That's about all I got to add.
Okay, all right, thank you. Hey, Jean, you're still with us. You have any 2 cents to put in?
Well, my experiences are different. Being one of the first homeowners, I moved in as a bride in 1952 in February. And we too had the duck walks and duck boards. And Patterson hardware store had opened. And we no sooner pulled up in front of our house, and here they come with a truck and the welcome wagon, and brought us all kinds of things. And I had lived with my parents in Chicago in a second floor apartment. And I knew nothing about yards. I had none. And one of the stupidest things I did, when we got a garbage can, because we were going to have garbage pickup, I figured, well, garbage should go way in the back, because that's what we did in Chicago. I went down 2 flights to empty garbage. Well, I put the can at the fence line at the back. By the time I walked out the back door and got to the garbage can, I was 9 feet tall with the clay on my shoes. It was an experience. We had a lot of fun. We had no trees, and the first time I washed my 9-pane window, which I thought was beautiful. I had to come into the house and lay on the floor, and I left my imprint on that black tile. It was so hot because no shade, no trees, nothing. But we had 3 children, born and raised and schooled in Park Forest and live still close by. And as everyone up on the panel said, it was a great place. We had more kids than money.
Thank you. And one thing I wanted to ask you, because we don't get much input about it, just for a minute, before you have to run. How many houses were on your street when you moved in?
I think it ended at Blackhawk. There were no more homes after Blackhawk when I moved in.
Okay.
But one other thing, they may have had their rumor about the Key Club. We had Peter Wheat. Anyone remember Peter Wheat? Yeah, he delivered bread. And he would come, there were a lot of rumors about him.
Everybody's nodding, all
What house, what street did you live in? Indianwood. I'm still there. It's still there, 52 years.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you had a chance to put in your 2 cents. Thank you very much for being here. And I think I just had a couple of questions that I thought of last night when I was watching the previous 1988 version of this was, what did the reporter mean to Park Forest women? I know it was started by women, it was women reporters, so they very deliberately got out news that women needed, but what did it mean to you when you got it and could read it?
I couldn't wait to read it. Adele Sachs went around the courts, and as did other people later on, collecting little tidbits, nothing tremendously important like the sad affairs of today's papers, but they were just fun and good and gossipy.
Some helpful hints, too.
Yes, yes.
Boy,
I know there were cooking columns. I keep seeing
Oh, yeah.
different ones of
That's
you in the
fun.
cooking columns, including Anthony Scariano, a spaghetti or something recipe, and
I think when Pappy Schechter took it over, however.
Yes, he did. Yes, he
it
did.
became a newspaper.
Yes,
Yes.
it became a newspaper.
right. Okay, and I'm just looking down now. Library service, I should emphasize, since I'm a librarian as well, on the side, sort of. Yeah, how soon did the bookmobile start, and what did that mean to you all?
Pretty quickly, I think, don't you?
Yeah, I think fairly
I was
quickly.
pretty busy,
Yes,
but I live there now, in the library,
right.
thanks to you.
So was anybody here on the library committee? I know that there was a library committee formed to make the library, and there were women volunteers who ran the library too. But,
No, that's true, they do.
But does anybody have any more expansion on mud stories? I don't know if you all know it, but the muddy little boys and little children picture that we use so much is Terry Ruehl's photograph of kids in her court. And I know there's got to be stories behind that kind of mud.
We took, somebody babysat, I had a very good friend who took care of Roger, and Ed and E.G. and I went into the city to get a Christmas tree that first Christmas. And I bought I think there's a picture of him in it, in the room.
At the museum.
In the museum. And we had to walk, Eddie had a new car, by the way. And we had to walk quite some distance for the Christmas tree place. And of course, with our limited finances, the person wanted so much for it, so Eddie used a little bit of box and pulled him down somewhat. I can't remember what the tree cost, but he took one look at us, the person selling the trees. He took one look at us, and he took one look at E.G. with all the mud and what have you, and said, "Geez, have a good Christmas, guys." I'll never forget that.
I think that most of us who lived there in those years remember going into the Jewel in Chicago Heights to shop, and we always wore boots. And they made fun of us every time we went in because we were always covered with mud.
And the first spring, that came up, when we went in shopping, and E.G. went down and thought, grass, Mommy, grass. He was so shocked that he didn't even know anything else.
And
We
they-
also had telephone lines. I mean,
Oh, the 8-party
more
line.
than one person was on your telephone line.
Right, it was 8-party lines, not just shared with one or two. So do you have any stories about the 8-party line?
I don't think I had an 8-party line. Must have been very
I
early.
had one.
No, we had an independent line, I know.
I
yeah.
remember Chaplain Lineberger coming to visit us. He was one of the first people.
He came before the pastors when they were deciding what kind of
You know,
church to
kind of
have.
churches to have.
One of the things from the viewpoint of kids is that we had wonderful pediatricians. Liz and Marion Feld were the first pediatricians who came into the village. And my second child had asthma and was frequently given to very sudden, gaspy asthma attacks. And I would call the office, and Dr. Liss would say, I'll be right over. He would come over, he would pick up my kid, he would take him up to the bathroom, he would turn on the shower, and he would sit with him in this steamy bathroom for 20 or 30 minutes until he stopped gasping. And after he'd been there about 4 or 5 times, he would keep saying as he came in, we got to stop meeting this way, we got to stop meeting this way. But if you can imagine in these days that, you call the doctor and he runs over to your house and picks up your child and delivers, instant medical attention. And that's one of my children's memories of the early days.
I'd like to know where he was when I had
Yes.
3 asthmatic
Yes,
children,
yes.
and he didn't come take a turn with us in the shower at
My
night.
Chicago doctor came down and delivered Roger in St. James, which is an
Oh,
old
that's very nice, wow.
Came all the way down, and he left orders for me to get up the next morning, which was another no-no in those days. And I don't know how many nurses and doctors waiting for me to fall flat on my face,
Yeah.
which I did not do.
Right. Now, you were going to tell an 8-party line story, weren't you? Did you have a story about the phone?
No,
But sometimes you learn some things
must have
about
been lots
neighbors
of
that you
them.
didn't know before.
Yes, yes. Okay. Well, we have a couple of minutes. Does anyone, there is a live mic over there. Does anyone have a brief anecdote that they wanted to share?
I can remember my neighbor, before we moved in and got sidewalk, the little boy went out and played, he had boots, and he got into the run. She had to lift him out, but the boots stayed in the run.
Yes.
There were a lot of good times and great memories, and I think it was like, well, I've been here since 1950. But all these things they've been telling about are so rich and good.
Yeah, I interviewed one of the teachers from Forest Boulevard School during the 50th anniversary, and she said the teachers actually had to take turns different days who was going to go out in the sidewalk area, in the parking lot area, and bring the boots up to the porch to dry because the kids were all inside stocking-footed. So, yes, Florence.
Jean's theory of being a Democrat in our forest. We were Democrats. And our first voting was in a house on Saw Trail, and we were relying on silent voting. Everyone voted.
Yes.
And you could hear the person in the house hollering, Republican, Republican. And my husband said, do you think they have another house for us?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Well, I might have to add an anecdote to the I Like Ike story. My son was, I think, 4, he must have been 5. And we were sitting around a table, of course, we were madly for Allie, and my entire street was Republican, we were the only Democrats there. And he kept saying, because my next door neighbor, our godchild, said, oh, every day, I like Ike. So he kept saying, he said, Allie, he said, I like Ike, just like your childhood. And this went on, and I kept saying, no, you don't, you love Allie, you're madly for Allie. And finally, this little boy said, I'm really for George Washington. He's a clinical psychologist today, so I don't tell that story anymore. Actually, I remember when we moved into our house, we moved directly into the house, we come up, somebody described an apartment, I think years ago, with a little kitchen, a little tiny dining room, but we had the same kind of thing with the Murphy bed that came out of the wall, except we had windows that didn't open because they were painted shut. But at any rate, we had, when we moved down here, I thought, oh, this is so wonderful. It's so big. And David's godfather gave us whatever the bluegrass or something seed for the entire yard. We had a room 200 feet across the back. And we moved down June 13th on Friday in 52. And we watched all the seed. Like 2 days when we planted. Watching them.
Same thing, did you?
Sit there
3 lawns.
Yeah. The house next door was just really good. And so David used to sail his boats in front of the garage. So it worked out very nicely. We had duck boards. But all these things were so, I thought, deja vu. And the schools were wonderful. I was very involved in the scout.
Okay, Anna?
I first met Jean when our daughter, who was in kindergarten at Dogwood School, had a little accident with a little boy taking her hat and throwing it out the window. And at my husband's urging, I was told to go see the family. And then I was contacted the school and they said, come to the PTA meeting. And Jean was president of our Dogwood PTA. And I became safety chairman.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
And they won an award. I don't know what you
Yes. In fact, I ran the only fun fair in the history of schools anywhere that lost money. The only one. I'm sure somewhere in the PTA, Hall of Fame, there's a corner, a dark corner that says that. But because we had so many fights about not charging too much for things so that all the kids could, so we put the prices down so low so that all the children could, do the games and et cetera, that we lost money. But the kids had a wonderful time.
Good.
Well, as a result of being your safety chairman, we entered a contest and won the award for that.
Well, that's good.
That was a bus, organized others to ride on the bus because it was unsafe for the bus driver to try to control 30
Right.
kids. And at that time, the kids were coming home for lunch. as well as
Yes.
going to school.
Yes, I know that.
But as far as the fun fair was concerned, I remember the women in the neighborhood getting together and making stuffed toys
Yeah.
and stuff. And we stayed 9 Mountain Stockings to stuff the toys with. Just all kinds of economical ways to make those things without it costing money so that we could make money for the school.
Yes.
Okay, well, I think we need to wind up and we can share more stories over refreshments, but I wanted to point out that I think what you can see here among all the women who've been participating and all the stories we also have in oral histories is the can-do spirit of the people who came to Park Forest, that if you stayed, you could deal with it and you were going to make the most of it and it was going to be a very good place to be. And also the social activism that was so alive here in Park Forest. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. There are still a number of pioneer men and women living in or near Park Forest. If you're new to Park Forest and curious about the unique history of the village, strike up a conversation with someone over 50 or 60 and you'll get a great story every time. The library has photographs, oral histories, newspapers on microfilm, scrapbooks, brochures, and articles which can help you learn more about this community. Whether you're new or whether you've been here a long time. If you want to come just to reminisce, you can do that too. Be sure to visit the 50th Anniversary House Museum, which the Historical Society runs at 397 Forest Boulevard. Open Saturdays 1 to 3, except for, we will be closed the Saturday before Easter, I believe. We have additional hours, though, than scheduled Monday, April 12th, and Wednesday, April 14th during spring break for Park Forest schools, so that parents and children can go together to see the museum. And thank you very much for coming, and Thank you, panelists, for sharing so much with us.
Thank you, Jane.